June 6, 1944. The Allied powers make a desperate landing in Normandy Beach off the coast of France. Nearly 160,000 soldiers invaded the country, and by the time it was over, nearly 45,000 of them would be dead. Their sacrifice was not in vain, as this provided the Allies a much-needed foothold in France that would later lead to the nation's liberation, which paved the way to a total Allied victory in Europe. Of course, World War II took place in the 40s, and cameras were widespread by this point, and all of D-Day was recorded, and perhaps thousands of photos were also taken. A lot of this footage capturing was directed by John Ford, a Hollywood movie maker who shot, in his own words, millions of feet of film in both black and white and in color. But we only have some of his footage today. One major portion of missing film involved a documentary film created for the Allied-powered leadership. The film was sent to Winston Churchill, Dwight Eisenhower, Franklin Roosevelt, Mackenzie King, and Joseph Stalin. This film was never released to the public, but in 2014, 4 reels consisting of 33 minutes of footage from this documentary was found in the US National Archives, where it was later posted to the internet. This is only part of it, and 11 minutes of the film is missing. Another big portion of John Ford's work is unfortunately sitting in the bottom of the English Channel. It was placed into a duffel bag so it could be sent to England to be developed, but the major handling it, W.A. Ullman, accidentally dropped the bag straight into the channel. It's not just video of D-Day we're missing, as plenty of pictures were taken as well. Robert Capa was a photographer on one of the earliest Allied power waves hitting the shores, and he took with him a camera, snapping 106 photos in total. They too were sent back to London to be processed, but we only have 11 of them. The other ones were burnt, accidentally, at the processing room in London. The photo dryer had its temperature set way too high, and the emulsion in the negatives was melted, ruining the photos, only leaving 11. D-Day was just one day out of the 6 years that made up World War II. And there are plenty of stories similar to this exact one, which is what we are talking about today. Welcome to the lost media of World War II. The Battle of Midway was a major naval battle that took place between June 4th and 7th, 1942 over the Midway Atoll. This was a major turning point in the Pacific War, and it ended in an American victory over the Empire of Japan. America lost 307 soldiers compared to the 3,000 Japanese soldiers lost. There is a ton of footage and photos captured by both sides of the conflict that is missing today. On the Japanese side, a civilian cameraman by the name of Teiichi Makishima was aboard the ship Akagi. He captured the footage of the ship launching and kept filming during the actual attack. He did survive the battle, but his footage did not. It was destroyed in a bombing. On the American side, a bombing squadron captured photos of a Japanese ship, likely the Kaiga. This plane then landed on the USS Yorktown, an American ship that would later be sunk. Upon the ship sinking, the photographer took the camera with him and abandoned ship. He developed the photos, and a senior officer saw them, confiscated them, and they were never seen again. After Operation Barbarossa went underway, a Soviet poet by the name of Musa Kali soon volunteered to fight for the Red Army. Born on February 15, 1905, Kali was a poet who had previously served with the Reds during the Russian Civil War. He was also making a name for himself in the world of Soviet poetry, meeting other famous poets of the time, and his skills as a writer became important for the war. He became a correspondent for the Otvega newspaper, where he reported on the war and wrote poetry based off the lives and experiences of the soldiers he met. In June of 1942, Kali's unit was participating in the Lyubon offensive, where he was seriously injured and captured. He would spend the next few months in captivity, but was given a job by the Germans. He was to create propaganda against the Allied powers, including his home country of the Soviet Union. He did take this job, but used his newly acquired position to instead create and distribute anti-fascist propaganda. He was caught and arrested on August 10, 1943, where he would soon be sentenced to death, being placed in the Moabit prison in Berlin to await his fate. It was here where he began to write a series of journals and poetry that would later be defined as the Moabit Notebooks. He would ultimately have his execution carried out on August 25th, 1944, but in this time span, he wrote at least 3 of these notebooks. We have 2 of them today. Notebook 1 was preserved by a fellow Moabit prisoner named Gabas Sarpov. He did escape prison and delivered the notebook to the Tatar ASSR Union of Writers in 1946. Notebook 2 had a similar fate, being preserved by Belgian prisoner André Timmermans. Notebook number 3 is a stranger story, as it ended up in the hands of Kazim Mirsin, some random guy from Turkey. The notebook was lost in the archives of Smersh, a group of 3 Russian counterintelligence agencies founded in 1942. It's likely this notebook was lost because of the views Russia had of Kali after he died. The last thing they knew of him was his involvement in creating German propaganda, so he was listed as a dangerous criminal. It wouldn't be until much later, in 1953, that fellow Tatar writers proved that he was producing anti-fascist propaganda. His legacy as a criminal was reversed, and he was celebrated as a hero of the state. He was given many posthumous rewards, and once it was found out that a 3rd notebook was missing, a search warrant was launched, but it hasn't turned anything up. After the joint German and Soviet invasion of Poland ended in a success, the nation was split in half between the two. On the German side, several ghettos were built for prisoners of war, and one of the largest ones here was the Lodz Ghetto. Like any of these built areas, life here was hell on earth. Areas were overcrowded, people were suffering and dying from malnutrition, and anyone caught trying to escape from the Jewish side was to be killed on sight. After these zones were established, a man working for the Jewish Council in Germany was relocated to the Lodz Ghetto. This man was Henryk Ross. Ross was previously employed as a newspaper photographer, and this is what he was to do here. He took photos of the ghetto, but was under strict surveillance and orders, being told what to and what not to take photos of. However, Ross was creative, and made sure to sneak photographs of all the atrocities taking place, including public hangings, children digging for scraps of food, people being carted away to their deaths, and much, much more. If there was something bad taking place here, Ross photographed it. By the time 1944 came around, World War II was coming to a close and the Lodz Ghetto began to be liquidized. Mass graves were dug and Ross was going to be put in one. He had to leave and couldn't take all of his photos with him, now numbering close to 6,000. So, he placed them into a metal box and buried it, hoping to return to recover them, but for now, he fled. He did return in January of 1945, where he dug the site up where he buried his photos. The box there was mostly intact, but a lot of the photos were not. Over half of them had water damage, leading to an unrecoverable status. However, the other half were used as evidence for war crime trials, leading to several responsible parties for the atrocities at the Lodz Ghetto to be punished. Once the trials were over, Ross lived a life of peace, donating his photos to museums so that this hell on earth would never be forgotten. We're gonna switch things up a little bit for this entry. The last few entries involved footage of the actual war, but now we're going to cover a movie made about the war during the war. Squadron Leader X was a World War II spy film created by British director Lance Comfort. The film had a star-studded cast for its time, starring Eric Portman and Anne Dvorak. The film features a Luftwaffe pilot named Eric Kohler, played by Portman. He's tasked with staging a false flag operation against the city of Ghent, located in Belgium. He was to fly a Royal Air Force aircraft, bomb the city, and jump out of the plane wearing an RAF outfit. The plan succeeds too well. The Belgian populace are convinced that he is an actual member of the Royal Air Force, so he's smuggled into Britain alongside other pilots who went down. It's here in Britain where he meets Anne Dvorak's character, an old lover who once sympathized with the National Socialists of Germany. After getting in contact, she reveals she no longer has these ties and refuses to help him get home. Now stranded in Britain, his secret gets out and he's hunted by both MI5 and German officials who are mad that he failed his mission. He's hunted by a Gestapo officer named Dr. Schultz and a shootout follows. Eric survives this and manages to steal a British Spitfire aircraft, flying back to Germany. However, the Germans believe he is an actual British pilot and is promptly shot down over the English Channel. The film received a lot of praise, and one aspect beloved by the audience was the air sequences, as they were actually made with the assistance from the British Air Ministry. Other film publications called it one of the best spy melodramas, speaking highly of the cast and describing it as an exciting story, well scripted, and produced with tremendous amounts of detail. Unfortunately, no matter how great this film was, we can't watch any of it. There isn't a single second of footage or still frames from this film. We only have the reviews and a poster. It was never shown outside of its initial theatrical release. The British Film Institute continues the search for it, and it's number 3 on their 75 most wanted lost films list. Once the dust of war settled, the nations of Europe began piecing themselves back together the best way they could. Life would never be the same, but it had to continue at some point. Artists across the world saw these horrible events as they were unfolding, and some of them chose to express their grief in their craft. This was particularly prevalent in Poland, as the nation soon attracted a blossoming animation industry. We can start with the first Polish animated film to be made post-World War II. This film is Reklama Reklamy, Polish for The Advertisement of an Advertisement. The film was created by Maciej Sinecki, a member of the Polish Filmmakers Association. The film is lost today, and practically all traces of it have been lost. There is only a single surviving frame, coming from a book that celebrated Polish animation. We can also quickly run through Szyktubilsyn, Polish for Was That a Dream? This is a Polish film that began production in 1947, and we know much more about it. 2 versions of the film are known to exist, but are pretty similar in nature. The film follows a young girl named Mariza, who falls asleep under a tree. In her dreams, she's transported to a land of magic, filled with talking plants and animals. Music is heard as the notes and chords materialize and hang into the air. The world is peaceful, until it's not. Wild, rabid animals begin chasing Mariza and the other creatures, until a hero steps forward and blows into a horn, scaring away the monsters. Mariza then wakes up under the tree and asks herself, was that a dream? The second version is similar, the same story, up until the evil creatures pop up. Instead of being simple demons, they were decked out in World War II era German iconography, with some of them being made to resemble members of the SS. The same thing happens with their defeat before Mary wakes up and asks herself, was that a dream? All of this was to symbolize the German invasion of Poland. How the Poles' peaceful life was suddenly upheaved and replaced with 6 years of fear before it ended, leaving many citizens wondering if it really was just a bad dream. As for the film today, both versions of the film were never released to the public and were never aired. We only know their contents thanks to the SFR officials releasing plot details, and they have also released still frames from the production. On the same day as Pearl Harbor, the Empire of Japan attacked the British colony of Hong Kong. Following 2 weeks of bombardments, the Japanese army invaded on December 18, 1941. This was a pretty brutal affair, and by the time everything was said and done, upwards of 2,000 British soldiers were killed and 675 Japanese were killed. And in the crossfire, 4,000 civilians would also lose their lives. Once it was over, the British surrendered Hong Kong to the Japanese on Christmas Day. Following this defeat of the British, the Japanese used the battle as a major piece of propaganda. A film was created of the battle and subsequent life in Hong Kong. It was titled The Battle of Hong Kong, The Day Britain Fell, and it was shown across the island. But we don't know what the contents of it included beyond the invasion and day-to-day life. The film has never been publicly released, only a handful of stills are available. However, the film is not completely lost. It has a runtime of 102 minutes, and 36 of them have been preserved and are currently being stored in the Japanese National Film Archive. There is another piece of the film floating around somewhere, the script. It was listed on the Kosho website, a Japanese auction site that specializes in old books. The script is said to be 122 pages, and it was sold, but it hasn't turned back up since. We could make a separate video about the amount of art that was stolen and subsequently lost during World War II. I knew I wanted to discuss at least one piece of art, but we ran into a question. What is media? Like, you've likely heard of the Amber Room, but it's a room. And is a room media? There was an entire train loaded full of gold and artwork, and it was also lost. Michelangelo made this sculpture, the Mask of a Faun, and it was also stolen and lost during World War II. But again, is this thing media? But for now, we will cover something I would consider to be media: paintings. There were tons of individual stolen paintings, but I will now discuss the probably best well-known one, Portrait of a Young Man. This was an art piece created between 1513 and 1514 by Raphael. It's not fully known who this man in the painting is, but it's thought to be a self-portrait. As World War II began, the painting, alongside many others, were stored at the Czartoryski Museum in Warsaw. As the German invasion began, Prince Augustin Joseph Czartoryski rescued many pieces from the museum, including Portrait of a Young Man. The artwork was hidden at a house in Sinawawa, but it was later rediscovered by the Gestapo. They were temporarily stored at Hans Frank's residence in Krakow, but were moved to Germany at the Führer's own personal collection. As World War II began to wind down, Frank took them back to Krakow, and this is the last time the painting was ever seen. Frank would be arrested by the Allied powers on May 3rd, 1945, and a few paintings were recovered at his residence. But one painting not included in the list was Portrait of a Young Man. The Czartoryski Museum has been spearheading a search for the painting, but it is yet to be seen. It's believed that this thing isn't lost, but it's residing in someone's private collection. We're gonna cheat a little bit for this one, but I found this story interesting, so here we are. We're going to discuss a movie that was destroyed during World War II, but was made 5 years prior to World War II and had nothing to do with World War II. The film is called Daibutsu Kaikoku, Japanese for The Great Buddha Statues Travel Throughout the Country. It's a kaiju film, and the monster in question, if you couldn't tell, was a giant golden Buddha statue. But this thing isn't a kaiju movie where the monster destroys a town or whatever, he just straight up explores the country like a tourist. It awakens and explores Japan, seeing many sights. He was said to have laid his head on a building, takes a long stride over a train, and holds his palm out for geisha girls to dance on. After this stellar country tour, it flies into the clouds, headed for Tokyo. The film was said to feature both scenes in color and black and white, and at some point, the Buddha statue visits both heaven and hell. There were plans for this film to be a sort of franchise jumpstart, with planned sequels to come out later. However, the movie was only shown in a few Japanese theaters and was since lost. A few people who worked on the film did have a copy, but they claimed it was destroyed during World War II. Even though the original is lost and is likely to remain so, the grandson of the director of the film, Yoshishiro Edamasa, helped develop a remake in 2018. As a part of the American military training for World War II, the Warner Bros. Company produced a series of black and white animated shorts. These shorts starred Private Snafu, an incompetent soldier who continually screws up and is corrected. These shorts were only intended to be seen by the soldiers of World War II and were never released in domestic theaters. However, most of them are available today through home releases and internet publications. But there are two shorts which are still missing. Short number 1 is The Secrets of the Caribbean, which features Snafu in Panama, defending it from exaggerated versions of the nation's wildlife. Howler monkeys, giant insects, and man-eating plants all attack him, but are fought off. This film is completely lost, but it's claimed that the Library of Congress has a copy, and it's likely Warner Bros. Has its own copy deep in its archives. The second short is much more interesting. It's called Mop Up, and would have featured Snafu fighting a sumo wrestler, defeating him by morphing his hand into a rocket before it crashed down and blew the guy up. This film was never finished or released. It was about 3/4 of the way of being done, but on August 6, 1945, Hiroshima and Nagasaki were bombed, and the following day, Warner Bros. Was ordered to shut down production of these wartime shorts. Every piece of production material was loaded into a truck and sent away, never to be seen again. The only piece of the short we have is a scene-by-scene synopsis and script that was found in the collection of Mark Kozler. In 1932, Russian animation duo Mikhail and Vera Shinovsky began to work on an animated film titled The Tale of the Priest and His Workman Balda, which was an adaptation of a fairy tale by the same name. The tale was originally written by Alexander Pushkin, a famed poet, who wrote a bunch of stuff I don't recognize. The famous Soviet composer Dmitry Shostakovich was asked to compose the film's score, a job he enjoyed. He described the film as easy and fun. A good portion of the film was finished, but problems would soon arise. The animators weren't as experienced, so they were often trailing behind the composer. Financial problems also soon arose, and the film's composer would face his own controversy. On December 28, 1936, the Muddle Instead of Music article was posted, an opinion piece on Shostakovich that trashed his work, leading to his declination in popularity. Following this piece, his work on the score ceased, which brought production to a halt. Everything was compiled into a mostly intact film, being 40 minutes in length. The film was stored at the Linfield Archives in Leningrad, a bad place for it to be. During the intense bombings of the city, a lot of the film was destroyed by a fire, and only 2 minutes of it exists today. The uncompleted score composed by Shostakovich was finished by one of his students and was released in 2005. Weimar Republic Germany used to be the world center for LGBT+ rights, and a staple of these early LGBT+ movements was the Institute of Sexology. This was a private institute founded in 1919 and headed by Magnus Hirschfeld. The institute was the head of research into topics such as gender and sexuality, including gay, transgender, and intersex topics. But the place wasn't just for LGBT folks. It also provided services such as treatment for alcoholism, gynecological examinations, marital counseling, and access to contraceptives. Unfortunately, the Institute of Sexology wouldn't last for long. Once the National Socialists took power in the 1930s, they began to destroy and censor certain aspects of German life, and the Institute was one such area targeted. Even before they took power, they directed several attacks towards Hirschfeld. He was beaten on several occasions and was even shot at once. We now go to May 6, 1933, where a group of students broke into the Institute and trashed it. The next day, every bit of the Institute's library was dragged out into the streets and set ablaze. A bronze bust of Hirschfeld was also taken out and thrown into the pile. Estimates say upwards of 20,000 books and journals were burnt and destroyed. This included early medical records and research into intersexuality and transgender-related studies. Hirschfeld was out of the country when all of this was happening, and he tried to restart the Institute in France in 1934, but passed away 1 year later in 1935. In 1974, a new Institute for Sexology was opened at the Frankfurt Museum.